Firstly, thank you so much for this opportunity to present my job market paper. And my job market paper is Foreign Exchange Risk Management Across the Production Network. In the international trade, 93% of the U.S. imports and 97% of the U.S. exports are dollar-priced. Therefore, the past literature thinks U.S. firms only have limited foreign exchange risk exposures due to this dollar invoicing. However, U.S. firms have a large amount of the foreign exchange risk exposure. Imagine that a U.S. firm exports to foreign countries. From the purchaser's perspective, they have to convert the dollar price back to their own currency. So their demand will fluctuate when the exchange rate changes. So when U.S. firms export, they face a large amount of the foreign exchange demand risk. At the same time, U.S. firms also face around 7% of the price risk when they import goods from foreign countries and when those goods are priced in foreign currency. One example is Intel, the tech company. It states on its annual report that an increase in the value of the US dollar can increase the real cost of our customers in those markets outside the US where we sell in dollars. This means the price risk. And also, they said a weakened dollar can increase the cost of expenses as for those non-US dollar capital expenditures. Those are the price risk. Besides those direct price and demand risk exposures, U.S. firms also suffer the indirect foreign exchange risk through the production network purchase-sales relationships. Even if a firm do not trade with foreign countries, if its suppliers or customers trade, that will bring the U.S. firm's indirect foreign exchange risk exposure due to the risk spillover. Faced with those direct and indirect demand and price foreign exchange risk exposures, U.S. firms are actively using the foreign exchange derivatives to stabilize their performance with respect to the foreign exchange risk. Here, I used the hand-collecting data from the firm's annual reports, and we can see that from 2000 to 2022, the percentage of the firms engaged in hedging the line has increased from around 6% to over 12%. And among those firms that hedge, the hedging notional amount has increased to less than $20 billion to over $80 billion. Firms want to hedge those foreign exchange risk because they want to stabilize their performance. In some states, they may face the financing constraints to finance their production, as characterized by the corporate finance literature. Since we already know that due to risk spillover, a U.S. firm and its connected firms face similar foreign exchange risk exposures, it is natural to ask, if my connected firms hedge, can their hedging strategies help to stabilize my performance? Or in other words, is there a hedging spillover effect across the production network? Therefore,
I have a very naive question. So I have never read this report. So how do they report the hedging amount? How do they describe it in the report?
Yes. So in the firm's annual report, they typically have a section describe the risk firm faces, including the foreign exchange risk, the credit risk, and also the interest rate risk. And after describing their risk exposure of the foreign exchange risk, they show the tools they used to deal with those risks. They report the fair values of those tools, and typically firms report the hedging notional amount. So the dollar value of those hedging. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the information is quite detailed.
Yes, but not every firm report that. Yeah, so that depends on the firms, but majority of the firms report that. Yeah. So my three research questions are, firstly, why do U.S. firms hedge the foreign exchange risk? We have already answered that question in the motivation part. And also, are there any hedging spillover effect across the production network? And if so, what are the mechanisms? And what is the optimal hedging distribution of the hedging strategies across the production network? And finally, how do the hedging spillover effects influence the production and pricing decisions within the production network? So I will show a quick preview of the results first. First, I use model to show two propositions. Firstly, hedging can help to reallocate resources from good to bad states. And there is a hedging spillover effect, which mainly works through the borrowing rate channel via the pricing decisions, which I will explore in more detail. And further, in the empirical parts, I try to identify those hedging spillover effects during the two recent big changes of the US dollar-euro exchange rate changes using the probability score matching method. And further, I show that firms situated at the extreme locations in the production and trade network are more likely to use hedging. Finally, I show that there is a strategic complementarities, like when the connected firms hedge more, firms hedge less due to the benefits from this positive spillover effect. And finally, I calibrated the model to the US data and show some counterfactual analysis, implying that the hedging spillover effect through the borrowing rate channel can boost the aggregate output and lowers the price. So my paper connects to three threads of literature. First is the firm's foreign exchange risk management strategies, which is explored in the past corporate finance literature, mainly using the emerging market data. Also, there is a firm risk management theory analysis focusing on the general risk management strategies. And also, there are some discussions of the operational hedging with the financial hedging. And also, my paper connects to the international macro literature, where they study the firm's price adjustment in response to the exchange rate changes. And finally, my paper connects to the literature studying the spillover effect of the public goods across the production network. Hedging spillover effect has positive externalities similar to the public goods, but not exactly the same. My key contributions are, firstly, this new hand collecting data from the firm's annual reports with the hedging information to show that US firms have significant hedging. And the past literature mainly uses either dummy variables or emerging market data. And secondly, I explain why US firms need the foreign exchange risk management, both price and demand risk, and also this risk pass-through matters. And finally, I incorporate the firm's risk management strategies into the production network and show that how the risk management strategies can spill over across the production network using both model and data. So before we go to the model, let's firstly look at some intuitions of the baseline model. First, let's assume there is a very simple vertical production network in which there are direct importers who import from foreign countries. And also there are direct exporters who export to foreign countries. So for those importers, if the goods are priced in the foreign currency, there is a foreign exchange price pass-through from the foreign firms to the direct importers and to the primary importers who are the customers of those direct importers and to the midstream firms and further downward. And also, there is a foreign exchange demand risk pass-through from the foreign firms to the direct exporters to the primary exporters who are the customers of the direct importers to the midstream firms and further upstream. For those primary importers, they will lose when the US dollar appreciates. This is because when the US dollar appreciates, their purchasing power declines for those goods priced in foreign currency because they have to convert the price back to their own currency. And for those exporters, they will lose when the US dollar appreciates. This is because the real cost of their customers will increase, so their demand will decline. To understand the analysis, I isolate the price and the demand risk by focusing on 4 sectors each time, 3 domestic sectors and 1 foreign sectors. Why we can do that? Firstly, if we assume the production network is long enough, on the left-hand side, price risk will dominate the demand risk, and the right-hand side, demand risk will dominate the price risk. So we can isolate the analysis of the price and the demand risk by focusing on the dominant risk. Secondly, from the import side and export side, the country and currency compositions are quite different. So every time a shock for the import side may not necessarily a huge shock for the export side. And when we break down this analysis into the price and the demand risk, within each sector, I assume there is a unit mass of monopolistically competitive firms producing the differentiated goods and sharing the same technology. They use the Cobb-Douglas production function, which they use both the intermediate input X from the connected sectors and the labor L to produce. And in terms of the subscription, the first letter represents the sector, the second letter K represents the firms within the sector. And here, it means that the sector 1 uses the foreign intermediate inputs to produce. And also, there is a CES aggregator within each sector who aggregates all the goods and sell it to the next sector. So the spillover effect exists at the sector level, which I will show very soon. And here, for the demand risk analysis for sector 3, which are the direct exporters, I further assume there is an exogenously given demand function in which it is decreasing when the sector 3's price increases. Then the key features of the model are the financial frictions. And the financial frictions will have immediate impact on the firm's production capacity or the operational costs. In other words, firms face the working capital constraints when they produce. Imagine that there is a construction firm who will only collect the revenue after a building has been built. Before that, it has to borrow to finance the intermediate input purchase to the production. And when they try to seek external financing, say from financial institutions, they're suffering our borrowing rate, R. And this borrowing rate is the risk compensation for the financial institutions, which will depend on the firm's repayment ability or the cash flow conditions. Here, I further assume when the net worth to asset ratio declines or the firm's cash flow conditions becomes worse, it will increase. So it means the banks require a higher risk compensation for the borrowing. And I further assume this is convex because the past literature has documented the convex external financing cost. It is a two-period model. In the initial period, firms make hedging quantity decisions Q. And in the second period, foreign exchange shocks are realized, and the firms make production and financing decisions. There is a risk-neutral financial institution who provides the foreign exchange derivatives, which pays the exchange rate EF when the spot exchange rate is ES. So the free cash flow firms get at the ES is just the difference between the two. If we sum this across all the states and times the probability of each state and discount it into the current state, the total cash flow will be equal to 0 if the firms cannot predict the future. And for those firms, for those primary importers, they want to hedge the condition when the US dollar depreciates due to the declining purchasing power. Here, this ES is defined as how many US dollars is needed to purchase 1 unit of foreign currency. So ES increase means the US dollar depreciates. So the primary importers has incentives to long the contract because they want higher positive cash flow when the US dollar depreciates or ES increase. On the contrary, for the primary exporters, because they want to hedge the condition where US dollar appreciates, so they have incentives to short the contract. so their hedging quantity is negative. To avoid firms to hedge infinitely, I further assume there is a hedging cost, so which is quadratic in the hedging quantity. So if firm want to hedge a really large amount, the cost is very high. And each monopolistically competitive firm K within the sector I want to solve the dividend maximization problems in the first period and the second period across different states. And the firms are trying to choose the dividend in the initial period, the second period, the hedging quantity, the total borrowing, depend on the state, and firms make pricing decisions P, and also the intermediate input purchase decisions X and hiring decisions L. Firms are subject to different constraints. First, there is a hedging constraint. In the initial period, firms allocate the exogenous net worth between the dividend and the hedging. In the second period, firms face a borrowing constraint, so which is saying that they want to use all external financing to finance their intermediate input purchase with the price P, which suffers the exchange rate changes, and also hiring laborers with the price wage. And also, there is a net worth constraint. So in the second period, firms make pricing decisions, selling those goods, all the outputs produced to the connected sector, having a cash flow from the hedging decisions, and also repay the borrowing with the interest rate R. Everything left is the net worth. And this borrowing rate depends on the net worth. And in the second period, all the net worth are paid back to the dividend holders, and that should be greater than zero. And also, within each sector, firms face a downward sloping demand function, so in which if a firm has a higher pricing than the sector level price, it will face a lower demand. Also, the hedging cash flow is just the difference of the spot and contract exchange rate times the hedging quantity, which is here. The first proposition I want to make using this model is the stabilized effect of hedging. And specifically, I want to show that hedging can help firms stabilize their performance by reallocating resources from good to bad states. And if we focus on the foreign exchange price risk and try to understand how the changes in the foreign exchange rate impact the firm's net worth. So here, if we focus on the price risk, the bad state is when the US dollar depreciates or the purchasing power decline. If we normalize the initial period exchange rate to 1, this log ES will be positive in the bad state. And in this bad state, the exchange rate change will have a negative impact on the net worth, since the first term, if we multiply this in, the first term is negative. However, if the firm hedges, this hedging quantity will reduce the magnitude of this negative impact of the exchange rate changes. Well, in the good states, the opposite happens. In the good states, this log ES is negative. If we multiply this in, when the US dollar appreciates, it means the US firms can enjoy these benefits, so the net worth will increase. However, if the firm hedges, since this is negative, if we multiply this in, the benefits magnitude just decline. Therefore, we can see that hedging reallocate resources from the good to bad states when firms do the hedging decisions. And then that helps the firm to stabilize their performance. Similar conditions hold for the foreign exchange demand risk analysis. The only difference are that the definition of the good and the bad states are different, and the hedging strategies are different. And the second proposition I make is the hedging spillover effect. So the intuition is like, this hedging will impact the borrowing cost. So if we see this price change P, it will be composed of the markup M times the marginal cost. This whole marginal cost will incorporate the borrowing rate because that's part of the cost of the production. And so this borrowing rate will impact the pricing decisions. And the pricing decisions is just the intermediate input purchase cost for the connected firms. So their demand will be impacted. So the net worth of the firm will be impacted for the connected firms. That's how the hedging strategy can spill over to the connected firms. To summarize, if a firm hedges, it has a more stabilized cash flow conditions, a more stabilized hedging interest rate, a borrowing interest rate, a more stabilized price, and then a more stabilized intermediate input cost for the connected firms, and a more stabilized performance of the connected firms. And to further understand this, we can focus on those firms that are not direct importers or exporters. In the simplified three domestic sector analysis, we can focus on sector 2. For example, if we focus on how the foreign exchange rate changes impacted the sector 2 price, for the bad state, it is this exchange rate is positive. The foreign exchange risk spillover will result in the sector 2's price to increase. However, if the sector 2 hedges, the impact of the price increase will decline. Finally, if the sector 1 who are the direct importers hedge, that will also have a hedging spillover effect into the sector 2. So it can help also decline the price increase for sector 2. Similar for the demand risk, the bad state is the US dollar appreciates or this log E is negative. So the demand risk will, if we multiply the negative in, that will make the sector 2 demand decline. However, if sector 2 hedges, which is a short position, it will make the declining magnitude smaller. Similarly, even if the sector 3, the direct exporters hedge, there is a hedging spillover effect to sector 2, and it can also help to reduce the negative impact of this demand risk spillover effect.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So this demand shock idea, I think, is very I think multi-step. I would say it requires a few steps of logic. I think when exchange rate change, it affects foreign demand for certain goods. First, I think it seems like it would be depending on why exchange rate move. So yeah, if it's a US reason, maybe exchange rate appreciate because of that is kind of exogenous to other economy. But maybe it's because the economy is growing strong and then their currency appreciate, so the dollar depreciate, and so that would have quite different implication, I believe. So I would like to see what's your view on this, and then I think I forgot my second question, so sorry. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries. So let me answer your first question first. So I think firstly, you're right. So some of the foreign exchange rate shocks are because of the foreign fundamental changes. And I will show my identification part very soon, which I used the 2 recent big changes in the US dollar euro exchange rate changes. And those changes are results of the monetary policy changes, either in the foreign countries or in the US. So you are right in the sense that there may be some reasons for those monetary policy shocks and the changes, and the associated fundamental changes result in the exchange rate changes. So in my paper, I'm slightly abstract away from that because I just assume the exchange rate is fully exogenous. But I agree that would be an interesting idea, probably are worth another research paper to understand the connections between everything. Yes.
So you want to think about these firms are hedging, like, I mean, I see these two events that you are showing. I guess you are saying that these firms are hedging mostly the US risk. Yeah. And I guess the second question I have is, yeah, so this is like, I mean, these are like DCP, but then even DCP, the demand would change, like depends on exchange rate, demand elasticity to exchange rate fluctuation, right? Now, suppose I have, I mean, I'm thinking about if firms like Intel or whatever, they do this type of hedging. So actually, they should be also thinking about other type of hedging that, when exchange rate is not directly involved. Okay, when I raise the price,
Yes.
you know, some company is going to buy less Intel chips.
Yeah.
They don't have a market to hedge that, right?
So, you mean that when they change the prices, because Intel is the only suppliers of those chips, so the customers have no choice but to accept the higher price, like that?
Uh, no, not exactly. I'm saying that like, anyway, I guess I will ask offline. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries, no
Okay.
worries.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
let me say
Keep
one
going.
thing. I guess
Yeah.
one point relevant to your question is,
Yeah.
for big companies, they may do offshore, like they may produce and sell in the same foreign market. So, that is another way for big firms to do the foreign exchange hedging. And here,
Mm-hmm.
in my paper, what I focus on is every foreign exchange rate exposed by the U.S. firms after getting rid of those operational hedging. And what I observe in the firm's 10K report is that they typically, when they describe their foreign exchange risk, they are discussing the operational hedging first, and then they say what are our performance change after getting rid of those operational hedging, and then we want to use the derivatives to deal with those types of risks after the operational hedging. So I think that's so that's the focus.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And then since we come to the empirical parts, firstly, I try to identify this effect using the two recent big changes of the US dollar-euro exchange rate changes. And the first one is the Draghi's whatever it takes in July 2012, where the euro appreciates 10% through the December 2012. It is a negative shock for the US importers because the decline in purchasing power. And therefore, those importers are more likely to hedge those risks. Second shock is the Federal Reserve Bank's signaling tightening cycle in June 2014, where the euro depreciates 30% through the March 2015. So this is a negative shock for the US exporters. So the exporters are more likely to hedge this. And following the FRO et al., so we used the probability score matching method to estimate of the impact of the upstream and downstream hedging on the firm's performance. First, we pick those firms that have trade with Eurozone countries because they are more likely to suffer the foreign exchange rate risk due to those recent big changes. Secondly, we estimate a probate of the firm's own hedging, upstream hedging, and downstream hedging using a set of firm characteristics including the firm size, industry, debt, trade credit, using the 6-month average data before the swings. So the firm's probability controls for some common factors that may impact their connected firms' hedging. Specifically, for the upstream hedging, it is defined as the percentage of input of a particular supplier in my total cost of goods sold times the probability of that supplier has the foreign exchange hedging. This probability is defined as the hedging notional amount of that firm hand collected divided by the firm's total asset. And I calculate this up to 3 layers, like the suppliers of the supplier's information are included as well. And the downstream hedging is the percentage of the sales of a particular customer in terms of the total revenue times the probability of that firm has hedging, up to 3 layers. And then I used the one-to-one nearest neighborhood matching method to identify the firms with no hedging in the control group, and estimate the average treatment effect on the treated using a set of accounting measures and euro beta. So this euro beta is estimated using the asset pricing method because we need to understand how the firm's performance change with respect to the foreign exchange rate changes. So unfortunately, not every firm report that in their annual reports, so there is no readily used data. So instead, I used the Fama-French three-factor model plus a set of foreign exchange factors, which are the nominal exchange rate changes of the US dollar with respect to the currencies of top 9 trade partners, and used the 12-month rolling window approach and calculated the monthly average beta. And this beta in front of the US dollar-euro exchange rate factor measures the firm's performance sensitivity to the US dollar-euro exchange rate changes. So here is the result. So in the result, the top panel shows the first swing, the bottom panel shows the second swing, and the three panels from left to the right shows the average treatment effect of traded on the firm's own hedging, upstream hedging, and also the downstream hedging. So the first result I want to show that since we observe the performance changes measured in each column, I put the accounting measure first, following by the euro beta measure. And I add the absolute value of those measures to measure the firm's performance changes or performance volatility in those two recent big changes. The first thing is we can observe all the average treatment effect on the traded are negative. So this means that the firms with the connected firms hedging have a more stabilized performance than those firms do not. Plus, the upstream hedging is more effective during the negative shocks for the primary importers, which is in the first swing, because they are more likely to hedge that swing since it is US dollar depreciates. And the downstream hedging is more effective during the negative shocks for the exporters, which is the second swing. If we look at the magnitude, euro beta first, the upstream hedging reduces the daily stock return fluctuations by 0.11%, and the downstream hedging reduces it by 0.07% for every 1% increase in the US dollar-euro exchange rate changes. For comparison, the S&P 5 daily stock return volatility is around 0.73%. So this is around 1/6 of the aggregate volatility. And compares with the accounting measure, because the upstream hedging matters more for the cost of goods sold. It can the firms with the connected firms hedging has a 1.32% smaller quarterly cost of goods sold fluctuations compared with those firms do not. And for the downstream hedging, it helps firms to reduce their sales volatility by 1.27%. We already identify this hedging spillover effect. The next question is how the hedging strategies allocate across the production network. Here, I do a very simple regression analysis, which I regress the firm's hedging notional amount on the firm's upstream and downstream hedging in the previous period, and also on a set of firm characteristics and production network characteristics in the previous period, including the firm size, the trade credit, the net degree, what are the relative role of suppliers or customers the firm is, and also the centrality, which is how important that firm is in the production network, which is typically measured by the Liang-Tiff inverse matrix. And here is the result. So first, let's focus on how the upstream and downstream hedging in the initial period impacted the firm's hedging notional amount by focusing on the column 1, 2, 4, 5 first. So as an introduction, the left panel shows the effect with the firm fixed effect. Sorry, there's a typo here. The right panel shows the result without a firm fixed effect. So it's more like the cross-section analysis. And also in each column, due to the number of the observations for those production network variables are not covering the full data set. So there is a decline in the number of observations in the second and the third column after we incorporate more production network characteristics. So I just show all the results.
I have a
And
question. So when you run these regressions, those, the cross-sectional dimension is the firms, but would you argue is there's a network here, production network here, then these samples should not be independent from each other, right? Because there's a
so
right.
yeah, so I think here I try to control that by using one period like if the firm given its initial period conditions, how that impact their current period decisions. So that partial address may not fully address the concern you argue.
Right, because then your residuals may not I don't know what method you use to estimate these regressions, but the assumptions underlying may not be satisfied when you consider there is correlations, right?
So you mean the let me double check. So you mean the correlations between the correlation between the firm in terms of the characteristics into production network characteristics or in
Right. So that will, I assume that when you do these regressions, you have to make assumptions on the epsilons, on the residuals. For example, they are independent from each other. But in fact, if your argument is on the network, So
yeah
that's
I
the
got
difference
yeah.
between the panel
Yeah.
regression and the spatial regression. So the panel regression usually do not take seriously. Some they might use some methodologies to take that into account, but
Yeah.
it's not strictly taken care of. But the spatial models kind of consider more seriously about the relation between firms.
Yes. Yeah, I got you. So I think here, maybe that's partially controlled what you said, but not fully controlled what you said. And secondly, in this part, I'm not trying to make the causal analysis. So just a task to check the distribution conditions. And also, yeah, let me conclude here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And the first, if we focus on those four panels, the first test that we do is the strategic complementarities, like if my connected firms hedge more, and in the previous period, I observed that, how that impact my hedging decisions. And the quick answer is when the firms hedge more across firm, yes, I will hedge less. And within the firm, that is more evident for the upstream firm hedging. And if we focus on the magnitude, it's like for across the firms, it's like for 10% increase in the upstream hedging as a percentage of my cost of goods sold, the hedging notional amount declines by $0.161 million US. And for 10% increase in the downstream hedging, the hedging notional amount declines by $0.083 million US. This magnitude is not extremely strong. Yeah. And secondly, let's focus on the other production network and firm characteristics impact by focusing on the bottom panels. And firstly, not surprisingly, large firms have more foreign exchange hedging strategies. And also, the firms with a higher trade credit, more likely to engage in trade, also have more hedging strategies. If we focus on the centrality, there seems to be no robust and strong relationship, but there is just a weak negative relationship. I would say more centralized firm, typically they got some natural operational hedging due to the large amount of the suppliers and the customers. So they may not need to hedge a lot. And also, if we look at the net degree, the number of the observations is very limited. But if we look at the data by plotting the net degree against the hedging notional amount, the net degree by definition is the out degree minus the in degree. So where the a higher number indicates that the firms have more customers than suppliers. Sorry, have more customers than suppliers. And the midstream firms typically have less foreign exchange hedging. And we can see that there is around the U-shape among the net degree hedging relationship. And the more extreme firms situated at the more extreme locations have more hedging. And this is because, firstly, they are typically more direct exposures, direct importers or exporters to the foreign exchange risk. And secondly, they cannot enjoy the hedging spillover effect as much as those midstream firms with zero net degree, so they have to hedge themselves. And then let's go back to the model. Before we make some analysis, we firstly recheck the optimal hedging amount of the firms. And the firms will hedge until the hedging benefits equals the hedging cost. And the marginal benefit of hedging is just the different the benefits from the cash flow and the benefits from the borrowing rate the firms get sum across all the states. And the marginal cost is just recall that we have a total cost, which is the quadratic form of the hedging times the cost C. So in the cost benefit analysis, two parameter matters. First is the hedging cost here. Second is the convexity of the borrowing rate function. If we do some analysis, we can see that when the hedging cost becomes more expensive, firms will hedge less. So the two lines, the red line represents the marginal cost of hedging, and the blue line represents the marginal benefit of hedging. And when the marginal cost of hedging increases from the dotted dash line to the dash line, the optimal hedging quantity on the horizontal axis just declines. This is for the price risk. Well, for the demand risk, it's like when the hedging cost increases from the dotted dash line to the dash line, the hedging quantity in terms of the absolute value also declines because those firms want to short the contract. And if we look at how the convexity of the borrowing rate function gamma impacts the impacts the hedging decisions, so a higher gamma means that hedging can reduce the borrowing rate, the borrowing cost more effectively. So it will increase the marginal benefits of the hedging function. So therefore, firms have more incentives to hedge. Again, the left panel shows the price risk and the right panel shows the demand risk. We can see that for the marginal benefit, if the convexity increases from the dash line to the dot dash line, the hedging quantity just increases. Similarly, the high marginal benefit changes from the dash line to the dot dash line, the hedging quantity increases for the exporters. And then we extend the analysis to our 5-sector production network into the US data by grouping 71 sectors into 5 big sectors. The primary sector, which engage in the international trade, import goods from foreign countries, and the early stage manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, construction and domestic services, and also the final goods, wholesale and retail industry. And when we match it with the aggregate hedging notional amount to output ratio, the primary sectors has 4.9% of the hedging notional amount to output ratio. And the sector 5, the primary exporters, direct exporters, they have this ratio to be 11.1%. And we can see that roughly similar to what we observe at the firm level. At this aggregation sector level, firms situated at the extremities also have more incentives to hedge. And then we calibrate this model to the US data, and to match the hedging notional amount of those extreme traders, extreme importers and exporters. In other words, Sector 1 and Sector 5's hedging notional amount to output ratio by adjusting the hedging cost and the convexity of the hedging borrowing rate function, gamma, which we see before. And this is the calibration result. The top panel shows the foreign exchange price risk. The bottom panel shows the foreign exchange demand risk. And here we report the hedging quantity and the hedging asset ratio. So the darker the color, the more intense that sector hedges. So firstly, we can observe that since we matched the data, Sector 1 and Sector 5 have a lot of incentives to hedge. Secondly, firms hedge more intensively for the demand risk than the price risk. So this is because the US firms face the condition of the dominant currency paradigm, where the demand risk dominates. And if we further decompose the percentage of the hedging for the price and the demand risk, we can see the direct exporters Sector 5 hedges around 99.6% for the demand risk, while for the direct importers hedges around 99% for the price risk. And for those midstream firms, they still have incentives to hedge the large amount of the foreign exchange demand risk because of their high exposures to the demand risk. And then we do the counterfactual analysis, in which we exclude the borrowing rate channel. And if we shut down this channel and redo the whole analysis, we can see that, interestingly, more hedging strategies reallocate to the midstream firms. This is because for those firms situated at the extremities, the hedging spillover effect do not exist, so they do not have incentives to hedge to stabilize their demand or supply. So they just pass through the risk to the connected sectors, so the midstream firms have to hedge more. If we focus on the price and the demand risk analysis for each sector, left column shows the previous baseline result, right panel shows the result with this counterfactual analysis. We can see most changes happen both in the extremity sectors and also the mid sectors. For mid sectors, they hedge more for the price risk because of this hedging pass-through. For the extremities, they hedge less for the foreign exchange risk they exposed to price risk for Sector 1 and the demand risk for Sector 5. So if we focus on how that impact the output and the price, we can see that if we turn off this borrowing rate channel and the associated hedging spillover effect, the aggregate output declines across all the sectors. And in aggregate, this decline, if we sum across all the states, is around 0.9%. And instead of that, the price has an increase and for all sectors. And this increase varies case by case in different states, and typically is around 1.5%. I think I'm slightly out of time, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me conclude. So here, the key takeaways of this paper is that U.S. firms do both foreign exchange hedging to deal with both price and demand risk and also the risk spillover. And also there is a risk hedging spillover effect across the production network, mainly through the working capital constraints. And due to the positive externality, firms hedge less when the connected firms hedge more. And the firms at the extreme production and trade network conditions are more likely to hedge. And this hedging spillover effect boosts the output and lowers the price. So some policy recommendations are that the firms overlooking the hedging spillovers, they may overhedge, and especially for those midstream firms. So policies like the market research subsidies can avoid this overlooking and help firms to take advantage of this positive spillover effect better. For the emerging markets, hedging can be really costly. So if they trade with advanced economies and they observe they do hedge, they can hedge less to take advantage of this spillover effect. So U.S. firms become our real global insurance providers in this sense. That's all for my paper. Thank you.